When someone is going through a storm, your silent presence is more powerful than a million empty words. This is Silent Presence with Rich Patricia. It's a show about caring, a moment for understanding, a time to think about those around you. In a time of increased stress and uncertainty, your silent presence is more powerful than a million empty words. And now, the host of Silent Presence, Rich Patricia.
Hello and welcome to Silent Presence, and welcome to week 400 of the quarantine, or at least it feels like that. Today's a great show if you're a parent, child, or teacher who's trying to balance your time during COVID-19. Our guest will talk about managing stress and anxiety, dealing with life adjustments, and just how to stay happy and healthy during this time. Today's guest is a licensed professional counselor, mindset coach, and author of the Freedom Craving Women's Guide to Burnout Recovery, 5 Signs Blocking Your Healing. Ladies and gentlemen, Marquita Myrick. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm very grateful to be talking with you today.
Well, I appreciate it a lot. You're a licensed professional counselor and a mindset coach. And today I thought it would be important for us to talk a little bit about mental health. Talk about depression and how to manage stress and anxiety, especially now during COVID-19. Is there anything that you can offer some of the listeners out there dealing right now during this period of time?
Yeah, I have a lot to offer. I think it's such a great topic, especially with dealing with this global pandemic. And I just want to say to all of your listeners, if you're going through something right now, you're not alone. I know that people are dealing with a lot of grief and loss. The social isolation has increased anxiety and depression across the board. So you're not alone, and there is something you can do about it. So a lot of people find help in seeking support. And what I mean by that is getting a counselor. Exercise is very important for people, because a lot of people don't realize, but exercise helps not only with the physical part of your body, but the mental part as well, because you release those endorphins. I tend to not practice what I preach when I tell people to try meditation, but I am doing it a lot now that I'm stuck in the home with my 2 toddlers. So meditation is very helpful. So let's see, I listed 3 things. So counseling, seeking that support, and then exercise, meditation. Sometimes journaling is really helpful for people. A lot of times people, especially when they're dealing with depression and or anxiety, they get stuck in their heads a lot. And so what journaling does is it allows a person to get your thoughts out of your head and onto the paper. And sometimes that act alone, it's something about writing. I don't know if you've ever heard that, but
absolutely.
There's something about handwriting that's so powerful. So it gets it out of people's head. And it also may be a good idea to not just journal to get your frustrations out, but over time you can look back at what you journaled about and see some patterns and start to notice what are the things that activate your depression and anxiety.
I'd actually love to hear a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so my background, I've been a counselor for almost 10 years now. And my journey to counseling is very interesting. Some people say, oh, counselors shouldn't, share their personal information. But I think sometimes it helps people connect with you when they know a little bit about you. And so I grew up in a small town in Louisiana and went away to Colorado after I graduated high school for undergraduate. Ended up staying there for graduate school, meeting my husband, getting married, so on and so forth. But when I first moved away, I was dealing with a lot of isolation. I was dealing with culture shock, small town to Boulder, Colorado, which is very different. And I got depressed very quickly. My anxiety started to kick in, and I didn't want to be there, but I also didn't want to go home. So I ended up seeking counseling on the campus there, and that experience within 2 months really changed my life, and I started to feel better. I started to want to get out of my dorm room and spend time with my friends who I'd been saying, I don't feel like hanging out today. And so it was something about that process. I didn't understand it. How did just talking to someone really help me feel better mentally?
Yeah.
And so I got very intrigued. So once I graduated, I decided to pursue counseling as a career. And so that's what led me to the counseling career. The coaching story is a whole separate piece.
That's fantastic.
But that's what got me to counseling. Yeah.
Well, I can tell you, I suffer from severe depression and anxiety as well. And when my son passed away, that just destroyed me. at that period of time
Yeah.
in my life. I actually, for the first time, had to seek counseling myself, which I had never done before and never really wanted to do, But anxiety in itself can sometimes be debilitating. I mean, you feel the pins and needles from the top of your head down to your toes.
Yeah, anxiety, people say, but high blood pressure is like a silent killer. I think anxiety is a silent killer. I think depression can be a silent killer because there are all these symptoms that people don't tend to recognize as anxiety. And it can really mess with someone. But I wanted to back up a minute and just offer my condolences for the loss of your
Oh,
son,
thank you.
too, because I know that had to be so hard. And I'm so glad that you sought support to help you process and grieve the loss you were experiencing. And I imagine you still experience.
Yeah, it's funny. I was always the type of person who said, "Man, I don't need that. I don't want to go, seek this person or that person." And that's something that's very common. I mean, a lot of people feel that way. And during that time, I just felt like I need someone outside of my house, outside of my group of friends and people in my life. I'd need to talk to someone because, it was really something serious, and it started to emotionally, it just drowned me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It can be emotionally drowning. And what's sad is that people they go to their friends and their family members for support. And those people, although they love you and they care for you, they are biased. And ultimately, they don't always have the skills to help you deal with your emotions, right? It's, like I'm a
No,
professional counselor for a living, so I have the skills to do it. But
that's
some
right.
people, they don't know how to deal with it. They don't know how to offer the care and compassion that's needed when someone's really struggling. I love the name of your podcast, Silent Presence, because, some people think they need to say something and then they do and they say the wrong thing or it's hurtful. And they didn't intend for it to be hurtful, but it's hurtful, or they become judgmental and it ruins things. But it doesn't have to. Just sometimes just being silent, just holding a person's hand or just giving them a pat on the shoulder or a hug is enough for some people in that moment.
Absolutely. And you're right. They don't mean it. They just don't know what to say. They don't know what to do. I think that's important for us to talk about a little bit because you have a lot of people that are out there that are dealing with different things right now. What is the most important thing that you can say that people can do for others during this period of time?
Listening, really practicing that active listening. I like to encourage, people in my life, when you're listening, take a note from a counselor, offer some reflections, maybe kind of summarize a little bit of what the person said so they know that you heard them, and offer support within your limits. And that within your limits part is very important because a lot of people say, call me anytime, right? Well, do you really want that person to call you anytime? No, you don't. So, no, you don't.
I just had a podcast with Allison Penna. She's known as the Bad Widow, and she talked about this sort of thing quite a lot. People offering, themselves and saying, hey, anything you need, anything I could be there for. But,
Yep.
And she offered a lot of advice on how she needed to tell people what she needed and at what time, and how important that was to really kind of put together a book of guidelines and rules to instruct other people how to deal with her grief. And I thought that was awesome.
Yes, I think that's awesome too. I think it's so important to set those limits with people. And a great question is, how can I support you? Because then it challenges that. First of all, it's an open-ended question, right?
Yes,
It
yes.
challenges that person. And second of all, it challenges them to take a moment of silence to really think about how you can support them. And maybe it's, hey, I'm having a rough time. I'm isolated at home, and it'd be really nice if you sent me a pizza.
Yeah.
Maybe that person lost their job and they're really craving some Pizza Hut or whatever. Maybe what you can do that day is send them a pizza, or maybe they say, hey, can you just check in on me a few times a week? That would be nice. So it doesn't have to be some grand gesture. But really put it back on the person to come up with what they need. And so, of course, sometimes people are not in a place to say what they need. And so then if you know that person well enough, you probably know, hey, this is a person who's always the strong one. This person does not ask for help. And so then you as the friend or as the loved one can say, hey, would you like for me to check in on you a few times a week? Would you like for me to send you I'm going to send you a care package in the mail. How does that sound? Or I'm going to send you a pizza tonight, you and your family. Is that okay?
I'll wait for my pizza.
You wait?
I'll wait. Yeah.
Give me your address. I'll send you a pizza.
I'll give it to you later. That'll be perfect. You talked about people and, dealing with others and talking to others. How important is it to keep those communication lines open?
When I say it's important, it has a high level of importance right now. And even for me, like I'm such a
Yeah.
social butterfly. I'm often more extroverted than I am introverted. I think it's fluid to kind of go in and out for some people. A lot of people are just stuck at home and they're surrounded by silence, or maybe they're over consuming the news and they're not reaching out to loved ones or no one's reaching out to them. I think the more people can stay connected via video or telephone right now, the more it helps people feel connected. One thing I like to do is Marco Polo. Have you ever heard of that
Of
app?
course. Sure.
Yeah, yeah. That's one way I've been keeping up with friends. I have a friend who was diagnosed with COVID-19, so that's one way we keep in contact, and I can see her and check in on her and see how she's doing. And I have other friends who are stay-at-home moms or they're just stay-at-home parents and they have a spouse working, and so we just check in a few times a week. It's not every day, all day, but we check in. Voxer is another good option. It doesn't have the video aspect, but you can record up to 15-minute voice clips, and that helps me stay connected at least. And by far, hands down, my favorite is video. Any
Yeah.
type of video platform. And I see families doing it more and more now. A lot of families had Easter dinner over Zoom, So it's important because I think your brain needs to stay stimulated right now, and not just stimulated by what you're seeing on the news, but stimulated by people, conversations and interactions with people you love and care about can help you stay connected when you can't physically connect.
You mentioned the news. With folks that are dealing especially with depression and anxiety and those sorts of things, what should they do about the news?
I think it's going to vary for the person. So I think one thing people should do is do a self-assessment. Ask yourself, how am I with ingesting the news? Do you notice that when you do, it causes you increased anxiety? Do you notice that when you do, 30 minutes later, all of a sudden you're overwhelmed with sadness because you're seeing and hearing about people at the food banks and people's job loss and people losing loved ones, So I guess what I'm saying is for some people, they might have to really assess where they are. And for others, they're going to know right off the bat, it's too much for me to watch and consume it. So my rule of thumb is you're going to hear it.
Yeah,
You're going
yeah.
to get on the phone and someone's going to say, hey, have you heard this? Have you heard about this new law or this new act? Or have you heard they found a treatment or whatever else? You will hear it. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is if you have a trusted news source, stick to that one. Just stick to that one. Maybe tell yourself twice a week, that's my limit. I'm going to check in with whatever news channel you subscribe to, and check in with them and them only once or twice a week. And then you got your dose of news and then you're done. What I love about podcasts is that, you get the title, so you know what it's going to be about. And with the news, you might get a few, and you can correct me on this if I'm wrong because you're in the industry, but you'll know in general some of the topics that are going to be covered. But you might not have known until you started watching it that they were going to show some graphic videos or some graphic images that
Oh,
might
yeah.
be a little activating for your brain,
Yeah.
So
They like
people
to
kinda
sneak
get
that. They like to
looped in.
sneak that in there, of course.
Yeah. So it's podcasts are the way to go.
What advice do you have for people as far as self-care is concerned?
I think self-care includes a range of things. So when people typically talk about self-care, they think, oh, you want me to go get a massage? You want me to take a warm bath, hot bath? I talk about aromatherapy tablets for the shower, and how they make your shower environment smell good. And that's really soothing, and it brings on the five senses. Self-care can be listening to a podcast again,
Yep.
listen to Silent Presence. This is self-care for
There you
people.
go.
Learning tips, this is self-care. Self-care is also asking for help, like we talked about earlier, for, someone reaching out to a friend and saying, hey, I need some support. It'd be nice if you could check in with me. That's self-care. Taking breaks is self-care. A lot of people are working from home right now. They have their kids crawling over them. And, if they're not in school, and if they are in school, they've become homeschooling parents all of a sudden. Take some breaks. Don't just push through the whole day as if you can't take a step back from your laptop or you can't step out of your home and just get some fresh air. Take a break. Self-care can also be setting boundaries. Setting boundaries is good for self-care. Letting people know what you can and cannot do. I have a friend who is working full time, and my daughter is in school, and so we went to drive by a few of the homes from her classmates. Some people were able to drive with us, and some people are just like, I'm working from home. I can barely even part ways with my work, right? But one of my friends set some boundaries this week, and she said, hey, I will not be in this meeting for 20 minutes. My daughter has been isolated for over a month. I'm going to go outside and we're going to bring our sign and we're going to wave to her friends who are driving by to say hello. So, and that's just one example of setting boundaries, but setting boundaries is huge. And meditation, huge for people who pray. That's self-care. It's so many ways. It's whatever makes you feel good. When you notice something makes you feel good, do more of it. That is probably a good indication that you're practicing good self-care and taking care of yourself.
That's really great advice. I use a program called Headspace a lot of times for meditation.
Yeah, me too.
Do you? I like the Australian gentleman that talks to me when I'm trying to go to sleep.
I do too.
Yeah,
I always choose him.
I know he has a really soothing voice, so I really like his. You're talking about, setting boundaries and everything. And I think that is so important. One of the things that they're telling us, I'm a teacher, and if I really wanted to, I'd be at the computer 24/7, answering questions, grading worksheets, doing this, doing that. And doing this stuff at home is a lot different than doing it, in a school setting. And I'm sure with many other fields as well, police work and working at the hospitals, and so many people dealing with so much stress right now. I really think that it is important to take a time out and say, hey, look, I have to give myself a break a little bit here too.
Exactly. Adults need time out too. I talk about that all the time. I take time out, and trust me, when I need one and I'm not taking it, my daughter will let me know. Mommy, I think you need a timeout.
Yeah, I wish I was younger right now. When my parents would send me to the timeout chair, I think I'd take advantage of that a lot.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, especially because when your kids are young, you can't really get the timeouts. They'll tell you to take one, and then you try, and then they follow you.
That's
when
true.
You're young, you can really get a good timeout going.
That's right. So what about people that are feeling isolated right now? There's a lot of people that are really feeling isolated and lonely. What can they do for themselves?
I think that connection piece is big, but I also, one thing, and this may seem kind of opposite of what I've already said about self-care and reaching out to people, but while you're in isolation, find a way to turn inwards, right? You're alone anyways.
Mm-hmm.
So now is a great opportunity for people to practice a lot of personal development. And it's something I talk to my counseling clients about a lot right now. Okay, so you can't go out. You've connected with friends on video and you're just sitting at home, but you're in counseling and you have goals to decrease your anxiety. You have goals to improve your self-esteem, improve your self-confidence. So that's where the listening to music comes in. If you've thought about creating a YouTube channel, maybe spend some time doing that, or maybe you thought about creating a podcast like Rich's podcast here, Silent Presence.
Yeah.
Now's the time you could be working on that and really just thinking, what are some ways I can improve myself right now? Is that taking a course? Is that taking an online course to learn something new? Because what people are doing, what I'm finding at least, is people are sitting at home and they're getting depressed and they're talking to friends a little bit. And if your friends have kids like mine, I can't be on the phone all day. I have my kids. I'm homeschooling now, right?
Right.
So so you really can't connect that much with others. So people are just sitting and just slowly kind of withering away emotionally.
That's not good.
And that is not good. So on top of your in-home exercise and you're listening to your music and you're getting in the groove and you're feeling good, find other ways to uplift yourself, turn inward and say, how can I improve myself so that when we come out on the other end of this, I'm not just the person who got more depressed, or got depressed and now we are allowed to go out and we're all allowed to go out, but you know what I mean? Like it's encouraged for us to go out and go to the mall again or go to the parks, and you don't even want to go because now you've been stuck in that depression hole for so long and you didn't do anything.
Oh, it's
so
terrible.
It's important to nurture yourself too.
It's terrible when you start sitting around just watching TV or doing things, and even myself, I find myself, okay, let me get out. Let me do something in the garden today, And before I know it, it's 3:00 in the afternoon. I'm like, maybe I'll do it tomorrow. And that's not a good routine to get into. I certainly never treated
Yeah.
my routine like that during the summer. Why would I treat it that way now?
Exactly, exactly. I think you bring up a good point. They talk a lot about routine for kids right now, kids who are e-learning. Try to keep them on the same schedule. Try to create, give them a routine so they're not losing it. Routine is important for adults also. Many people were used to going to get their coffee and then, commuting 30 plus minutes to work and listening to their podcast like Silent Presence. Another
Boy,
plug there, right?
you're really plugging me a lot today. This is great.
I'm plugging you a lot today, okay, Rich? You might have to send me a pizza after this.
Okay, I will. I will. You know,
So,
y-
and
you
yeah,
know,
go ahead.
it's interesting that you bring that up because if you think about it, so many people they can't wait to retire, right? And
Yeah.
finally they get to retire, and a lot of times you hear really sad stories about the folks that retired and how within 5 years, some of them or many of them have passed away. And a lot of that
hmm
has to do with not getting into a routine and not doing anything once they do retire.
Yeah, yeah. I've heard that so many times. In fact, I have several people in my family who are retired now, and some of them have actually gone back to work because, we talk about it as a family, and it's like, yeah, they're starting to seem a bit depressed now, not doing anything because you were so used to being stimulated in different ways in your work environment. And then if you just go to doing nothing, you have no hobbies, you're not going to your local YMCA a few times a week to exercise or whatever, or meeting up with friends, then that is a breeding ground for depression
Oh, yeah.
and anxiety to set in.
You also primarily you work with a lot of women, and I know that you have a discussion with them in regards to finances. What about people right now that are worried about their finances? They're losing their jobs. They can't pay their health care bills. They might not have
hmm
health care. What advice do you have for them?
Well, first off, for anyone listening, if you are experiencing any of what Rich just mentioned, our hearts go out to you. Hold your head up high. I have some clients who are dealing with that now. And one of the things we talk about is not thinking into it, right? Because I think it's very easy for people to say, I just lost my job. I don't have health insurance anymore. Now I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to feed my family and keep a roof over our heads. Before you have that freak out moment, sit down and list out your resources, right? So, they've talked in the media about different resources that you can apply for. Maybe your employer is applying for a loan to maybe get you back. So think about some ways you can bridge the gap and don't get into this place where you think I'll never find another job. Some people are going there because a lot of people are losing their jobs, right?
Yeah.
Guess what? I'm also hearing that people are hiring right now, right? So there are companies like just CVS, for example, announced that they were going to be hiring, I want to say 150 plus thousand people to work remotely. So before you get in that, I'm not sure how many job opportunities they have left, right? But I know that was one company specifically, and Amazon as well.
And the states
So
usually, like the states, state of New Jersey, California, and so forth, they also have a lot of jobs that they're offering right now too.
yeah, they have jobs as well as look at your unemployment offices because they're experiencing such high volumes that their websites are literally breaking, right? But they're also saying, hey, we're hiring more people to handle the demand. So if you're applying for unemployment and you see that and you're desperate to get back to work right now, start paying attention because some people just shut down and then they start like we've talked about, falling into the depression, not talking to anyone, not turning inwards to self-improve, right? But start paying attention to who's hiring so you can work from home with your kids, right? And then having some hope. I think if there's one thing I can leave people with about that is have some hope. This will not last forever, right? Right now we're in it, so it feels very heavy, right? It feels like
Hmm.
we're never going to come out of it, but we will come out of it at some point. You will be able to rebuild. And just one more thing I want to add to that really quickly is that if you're a person who has lost your job and you're struggling to pay bills, think about other times in your life that you have overcome something. And that sometimes, I won't say it's enough to pull people out, but it's enough to give them a wake up call to say, you know what? I did lose my job back in 2000. And I remember getting on unemployment and I remember working a side job, but you know what? I made it work.
Yeah.
You made it work. There are times in your life where you have overcome something before. Look at those times, review those times and think what was going on with me then. What strengths can I pull from those experiences to utilize in my life now?
Great advice. You have children of your own.
Thank you. Yeah.
Working with children right now. Some parents are working with children that have mental health issues. Other parents are working with
Yeah.
children that don't, but are certainly stressed out with schoolwork and a variety of other things right now on top of everything going on. What's the best advice you can give to parents? And what's the best advice that you can give to kids?
To parents, I would say, and I just posted about this on Facebook a few days ago, and a lot of parents resonated with it. Our kids are going through something too, right? I think for parents, it's very important to limit. Not only are you limiting your exposure to the media, but you need to really limit your kids' exposure. If you're going to watch the news in front of them, I'm just going to say it's probably not the best idea. We weren't
Mm-hmm.
news watchers, or at least I wasn't prior to this, but I started watching the news because I wanted to know what was going on. And my daughter and my son started biting their nails.
Yeah.
Weeks 1 and 2, they're biting their nails because I'm watching the news. I'm talking to my husband when he comes out of meetings because he's working from home now. Hey, did you hear about this on the news? Did you hear about the vaccine? Did you hear about that? And the kids are hearing it and they don't know how to interpret it.
No.
Right?
No,
They
don't.
just know that there's a virus. Yeah. So there are resources online right now that will explain to kids what's really going on. And I think if you are a parent that wants your kid to understand and to know a little bit about what's going on, give them a kid-friendly version. Keep the news out of their faces. For parents, take your breaks. Again, please take your breaks, because a lot of people like to say, I'm a perfect parent. I never raise my voice at my kids. Sure you do, because you're human, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or you change your tone and it's really stern because you're overwhelmed. Take some breaks. Get your kids together and do meditation. I've been doing that with my kids on the Headspace app, like we
Yeah.
discussed earlier. I'll say, hey, before we started school this morning, let's do a 3-minute attention span, meditation. And they lay down with me and we do it. And it's just 3 minutes, right? They're both under 4, so they can't tolerate a long length of time. But it's not only is it something you can do with them, but you're role modeling. This is how we calm our bodies down,
Yeah.
So the breaks, limiting your kids' exposure to the news, helping them meditate to calm their bodies down, or find other ways to help them calm their bodies down. There's so many examples online. And also, as much as you can, parents, please connect your kids with their classmates somehow. I've reached out to parents in my daughter's class to say, hey, can they connect on Zoom? Can they talk on the phone for a few minutes? My daughter's really missing your daughter or your son. And then, so my message for kids is, this will pass. This is a moment in time. And I really want you to think about all that you're gaining through this experience. And so what you're gaining is more alone time with your parents. Your parents are teaching you how to meditate, or you're finding creative ways to engage with one another and have fun. And your mom and your dad have all of a sudden become a teacher for you. So really embrace this time and really, really lean into it and enjoy this time that you have with your parents. And enjoy getting to know your friends in a new way on video. Enjoy learning technology. Maybe you're getting limited exposure to technology at school, and now you're getting to get a little closer with it and learn new things online, because so many websites are offering free sections for kids or free subscriptions. So this will pass. I think kids need to know that this will pass. You will be okay. When you get sad and anxious, or sad and you get a little worried, you have to use the kid language, you can go to your parents and talk to them about it. It's okay to let them know what you're feeling.
I really love your outlook on things. There's so many people that look at the negatives, but yet, when you look at some of the positives that are taking place, and there are a lot of positive things. I mean, it almost throws us back to what families were like years ago, before all of the technology, before all of this stuff. They were able to sit around and, one of the lessons that I teach in my classes on like radio and television production is how the families would all gather around a radio set or all gather around a television set every evening and talk to one another and watch the show and sit at a table in their dining room and eat a meal together. So there are a lot of things that are kind of coming back as a result of this as well. And
it's so interesting. I got a visual when you were talking about people, families at the dinner table and families around the radio, because, it's easy to focus on the negatives that are going on right now because it's so close. It's so in our faces, right? But if we can just shift and focus on the positives, we will recognize the ones that are present in our lives. And so many parents are used to commuting, spending hours commuting, missing dinner time, right? And so now not only is that parent available for dinner with their family and they can sit around the table, but they're also working from home, so they're available for lunch, and so it's interesting once we take that commute out of the way, how much time it frees up and how much more available a parent can be for their spouse, for themselves, and for their kids.
That's very true. What about folks who lose a loved one during this period of time?
So I think not allowing yourself to stay isolated socially is key. And of course, I know you can't go out and be with loved ones right now. That would be ideal so you could get the hugs and that physical closeness you probably need. Really staying connected on video, on phone. Please don't just drop off the face of the earth and no one hears from you again, because 9 times out of 10, you have so many people who care about you and love you. And so reach out for support. I encourage people who are grieving to seek counseling. That's my biggest piece of advice for people who are grieving right now, because when I do watch the news and I do hear the stories of people's loved ones, it's a different story we're hearing. This is a pandemic. There are people complaining that their employers could have done more to save their child or to protect their child when they were on the job, or people who their loved one is going into the ED, the emergency department, and never coming out, and they had no opportunity to visit. That's very different from someone whose family member is dying, right, from
Yeah.
something that they had already, and they can go in to visit. They don't have to say goodbye over Zoom or Skype, right? So I think we're going to see a lot of people who are grieving grief is grief, but I think there are going to be some interesting characteristics to this type of grief.
Yes.
And so please don't grieve alone. Please don't do it alone. Get some support if you can. Reach out to family and friends and just know that it will pass. The grief itself, and maybe you could speak more to that because you've lost your son before.
Mm-hmm.
I think once you're grieving someone you've lost and you love, the grief will always be there, but there are stages to it, and people go in and out of those stages. So that's what I mean by that. There may be a moment in time where you have some acceptance, and that's one of the stages of grief. You start feeling like, okay, I'm going to accept this. I know my loved one would want me to move forward in life and not just get stuck in my grief. And then maybe the next week, you find a letter that person wrote you years ago, and all of a sudden now you're feeling depressed. So it's going to go in stages. Know that for sure it's going to be an up and down process, but you can live a fulfilling life even after having lost a loved one. And also find a way to honor that person. That's my final piece of advice about that, because a lot of people, they find their grieving is healthier when they find a way to honor that person in some way. So that could be starting a campaign. If your loved one was really passionate about a certain topic, maybe you start a support group, or maybe you start a little meetup for people to meet up at a coffee shop every Wednesday to talk about the loss of their loved ones or a topic that was important to your loved one. Whatever it is, right? It's going to be unique to the person, but find a way to honor that person. Because I bet that person would not want you to just drop out, to step out of your life and, curl into a ball and get super depressed and not live life again. I don't think that's what your loved one would want for you.
I think that's great advice. I mean, this is the way that I'm celebrating my son's life, through doing this podcast. And the other thing that I thought was really important that you brought up was you mentioned moving forward. You didn't say moving on. And a lot of times people will say, oh, you need to move on. Well, I don't believe that there is any way that you can move on. I think that you only move forward.
It's interesting that you notice the language I used around it. I try to be very sensitive when talking about these kind of topics. And while you were speaking, it made me think of another way that people may be grieving right now, job loss. People go through the same stages of grief with job loss.
Oh, yeah.
So, even if you haven't lost a loved one and you're out there and you're listening to Silent Presence and you've lost your job, or even the loss of life as you knew it, right? We're all grieving in some way, because life as we knew it, we understand that a vaccine we're probably about 18 months out is the last I heard. Maybe it's shorter. Maybe someone discovers one sooner. So what does life look like? Once these stay-at-home orders are lifted, we're not sure. And so we may find ourselves in a place of where we're grieving what life used to be like. I used to just be able to go sit down at the coffee shop. I used to just be able to go sit down at Olive Garden. And so that's my favorite restaurant. So
Mine too. I love the salad.
I love it, right? Yeah, yeah, I had it for lunch, so that's why it's fresh on my mind. But
See,
my
I go
understanding
I
is that
I go there. I go
no, go
there.
ahead.
I eat the salad, and then I bring the food home with me, the meal home with me, and then I have another meal at home.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, you have to savor it. You have to save some when you have Olive Garden.
That's right.
My understanding is that dining in restaurants is going to look different. We may be 6 feet apart from the next table, or they may be spacing it out even farther. Life is going to look different, and so we're all going to be grieving the loss of something after this. And so just recognizing that if you start to have feelings of grief over life as you knew it, that's normal. I want you to normalize it, and know that you can seek support for that too.
You're the second person this week that I've done interviews with that have mentioned losing a job and losing other things in life besides a loved one is the cause for grief. And I found that very interesting because I never looked at it that way. While someone could be so in love with their job that, they're going through that same type of grief.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's the second time this week it's popped up. I did a 5-week grief and loss group at my church back when we lived in Denver. And it was so interesting to see the types of things that people were bringing up and not feeling like their grief was valid around those things. So one example was one elderly woman said, I never learned how to drive. And she was
Mm.
tearful about it. I
Mm-hmm.
never learned how to drive, and I've always felt bad about that. I cry when I think about it. Why did I never do it? And I felt like I couldn't even come to this group because I'm not here because I lost a loved one.
Yeah.
Well, you lost this ability at a moment in time to drive, to learn how to drive. There were circumstances preventing you from doing it, and you've carried that throughout the years. So yeah, I think, like you said, it's definitely different from losing a loved one, right? It's a different type of grief. I don't think it's on the same level of severity, and certainly the symptoms could be the same level of severity depending on the person, right?
That's true.
But there are different types of grieving that we all do, and that acknowledgement piece is key for people to recognize that you can get support for your grief despite it being job loss. And in fact, some people are working at the jobs for 10 plus years. What if
Yeah.
you've been at your
Oh,
job
yeah.
for 25 years and all of a sudden the people you were connecting with daily and the work you were so passionate about, you're no longer doing. It's interesting. It's a grieving process.
It sure
For
is.
sure.
I think people had a certain level of expectations prior to COVID-19, and now they're in a situation where they find themselves having to manage their own expectations during this time. What's your advice for that?
I think people have put a lot of pressure on themselves to not gain weight, right? to still have the same level of performance at their job, even though they're not in the office. They can't just walk next door and ask their coworker a question because maybe their coworker's now also working from home and chasing kids or homeschooling, right? So I would say there needs to be, I'm also a mindset coach, so there needs to be some sort of mindset shift there. Don't put all that pressure on yourself. Acknowledge that things are going to look different right now, and they need to, because you may be grieving. This is a transition. You're now homeschooling, or you're now home alone and you're isolated. That's where those breaks come in at, right? So
Yeah,
just
yeah.
giving yourself a moment when you start to feel overwhelmed and feel like you're not meeting the expectations of your employer, of your child. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
maybe the curriculum they sent home is too hard. And I know that one's hitting home for a lot of parents right now, because that was me week one. Like, I can't do this. I'm not a teacher. I don't want to be a teacher. I can't do this, right?
Wasn't easy, was it?
No, it wasn't. And then the curriculum changed 3 weeks later, and then that was a whole thing, right?
Lovely.
Taking the pressure off of yourself and saying, this is not the time for me to beat myself up. And so I think that's how you manage expectations. You really recognize what's different about life right now. Can you possibly perform at the same level? Can you possibly go from overnight not having a degree in education and being a formal teacher to the opposite of that, to being a teacher who you can't make that transition overnight. But what you can do is you can look at the lesson plan and say, we're going to do this. Mommy, daddy's going to figure it out. We're going to tackle this as we get through it. We're going to work through it as a family. When we need to take breaks, we will take breaks. I am not in a traditional school environment, so I cannot perform the way a traditional school teacher would. And so just having that awareness piece and that recognition that things are different and it's okay. It's okay to not be perfect right now.
What are the red flags for people right now when depression or anxiety or some of these things are going to start taking over a little bit?
So for depression, anytime you start feeling hopeless, you start feeling sad more of the day than not. When you stop reaching out to people that you care about, typically it's one of the symptoms is loss of interest in the things you previously enjoyed, right? And so there's a lot of that right now. Okay, like you can't go to the mall. You're not having that commute to work and getting to drop your kids off at daycare. You can't go get your coffee or your tea, right? Or maybe you can, depending on your state. But noticing that you no longer even have an interest. People are meeting on Zoom and you don't have an interest to show up. You're rolling out of your bed at the last minute to start your laptop for that 8 a.m. meeting. Whereas when you were working and going, well, you're still working, but when you were going into work, when you were commuting in, you would get to work 30 minutes early. You would sit at your desk and enjoy your coffee or your tea or a bottle of water. And then you would freshen up on your notes for the meeting. And now you're just rolling out of bed. You've stopped. And this some of this may be things that people are just doing in general for the fact that they're just home. But if it's important to you to get up prior to your day and shower or, do your morning routine and, do your affirmations, do your devotional or journal or write in your gratitude journal, whatever your previous schedule used to look like, your previous routine, if you're shying away from that and you're no longer doing it, that's another sign.
Okay.
Tearfulness, big sign. Tearfulness, if you're really sad. If you're finding yourself, for the anxiety, that was depression, but for the anxiety piece, if you're finding yourself shaking a lot, some people don't recognize when they just started really shaking a lot. If you notice that, just kind of think about, okay, what's going on? What did I just watch? What did I just hear? Who did I just talk to? Why would I be shaking? If your fear has increased.
And then avoid that.
Anxiety. Yeah, and you can't avoid it right now. Everybody's getting fearful. What's happening, right? But if that's increased, if you're noticing that you're biting your nails a lot, that's what my kids were doing in the beginning. And still, my daughter's still doing it, biting her nails when she gets a little anxious. What's happening next, Those are some of the signs of depression and anxiety that people can really be looking out for right now.
I'd like to talk about compassion, being compassionate during this period of time. How important is that?
It's so important. I think compassion towards oneself and compassion towards others right now is huge. The specific example that's coming to mind is when we talked earlier about recognizing all of the positives that are coming out of this, recognizing also that when you're talking to other people, just saying, oh yeah, so many things of, like for me, my husband's home during the day now, so I get a few breaks. Like if he's taking a 5-minute break from work, I can go run to the restroom by myself. That's amazing. For some people, they're not getting that. For some people, they're at home depressed about not having a job. For some people, they're trying to figure out how they're going to put food on the table. So just really showing empathy for others and recognizing that not everyone's in the same boat right now. People keep saying we're all in this. We're all in this together. Well, the reality is we're not. We're all in our homes, our individual homes. We're in it with our families. Or if you're single, you're kind of feeling like you're in it by yourself because you're at home dealing with the increase in depression and anxiety by yourself. So just have compassion for other people. And know that not everyone is handling this the same way. Not everyone has the same access to resources that the next person does. And so the best thing you can do is be a good friend, be a good neighbor, call and check on that person and just let them know you're thinking about them. And as far as compassion to oneself, it's really where self-love comes in, not beating yourself up for having lost your job, not beating yourself up for not being the best teacher, the best homeschooling teacher right now, because your friend over there, next door has been homeschooling for 10 years and she is rocking it out and posting all about it on Facebook.
Good for her.
You're beating yourself up because you're not as good. You're not performing as well. You're not going to be teacher of the year, homeschooling teacher of the year. If you're comparing yourself to her. So,
is there an award? Is there an actual award for that? Can you get a certificate for that?
no clue. There probably is. It's a funny joke is my daughter's school district sent out an email yesterday saying it's Teacher Appreciation Week and how are we going to honor our teachers? And I thought, how are you going to honor me? I would like to know. Would love to know how I'm going to be honored.
We'll send you a
and
pizza.
Her pizza's amazing, but yeah, send me a pizza, please.
Let's talk about your profession. You're a mindset coach. You do this professionally. What would you like to say about that? How can people contact you? What do you have to offer?
So yeah, I'm a mindset coach. After my experience with burnout in 3 different jobs in the professional counseling field, I knew something had to change. And, it wasn't until a year and a half ago where I really started putting the pieces together and saying, you know what, this is how I healed from burnout. And I want to help other women heal from burnout too. And I know how to help them because I've been through it and I know what to watch out for. So the woman I work with is women who are freedom craving and they desire to heal from burnout. They desire a transformation in their mindset and they have some mental blocks that we need to go in and really work on removing and addressing. And so the women I that are attracted to me and my work, they are sick and tired of being sick and tired of their jobs, but they feel stuck and they've accepted that that's life for them. I probably should just retire because I have kids or because I have student loans or whatever else. So I help women stop making excuses as to why they can't step into their zone of genius. And we get through to that process by helping them heal first and really remove those blockages and develop a growth mindset so they can really take charge of their lives and live the one that they deserve to be living. People can find me on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. I almost forgot LinkedIn. And LinkedIn, I'm at M Myrick Coaching, M for Marquita, Myrick Coaching. Or you could just look up my first and last name. I'm sure it'll be in the show notes somewhere, and you'll find me on all 3 of those platforms. And I love to provide valuable content for my audience. I actually do have a guide for freedom craving women. It's called the Freedom Craving Woman's Guide to Burnout Recovery: 5 Signs Blocking Your Healing. So women can really expect to gain some clarity on what's blocking their healing, what's keeping them burned out. And I also provide some tips as to how they can start to heal from that burnout on their own. So I would love to offer that to your listeners as a gift.
Terrific. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Marquita, you have been an absolutely wonderful speaker, wonderful guest, and I really appreciate it.
Oh, I really appreciate you too, Rich. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I really hope that your audience gets a lot of value out of not only this episode, but all of the other ones that you have and will continue to air, and blessings to the Silent Presence podcast.
Our guest today has been Marquita Myrick, licensed professional counselor, mindset coach, and author of the Freedom Craving Women's Guide to Burnout Recovery: 5 Signs Blocking Your Healing. To learn more about Marquita or to find out more about her writings, visit her website at marquitamyrick.com.
Thanks for listening to Silent Presence. Tune in next week for another amazing guest. And remember, be kind to one another. You may just be the silent presence they need